Welcome to the Breakup Recovery Podcasts by your host, Barbara Stevens. Discover the wisdom and remarkable insights of Barbara Stevens, breakup recovery mentor, author, and public speaker. Barbara offers programs and solutions for any breakup so you can turn your life around, create lasting changes for the better, and embrace life again.
Hello and welcome to my podcast, Breakup Recovery. This is episode number 023. I'm Barbara Stevens and I have with me Alvia Turney. And if you remember, I've interviewed Alvia on a previous occasion, episode number 017, about her business Act for Tomorrow, who are a separation specialist. Now, what brought you to this line of business, Alvia?
Well, it was my personal story, Barbara. Like so many people, when you've gone through an experience and come out the other side, you realise the pitfalls. For me, the realisation that I could actually help other people avoid the legal mayhem is how I would put it, as well as the emotional shock that I was going through. So my story really starts when the phone rang and I just arrived home picking up some Japanese students that we had to stay with us, with a friend of mine who also had her own student. We arrived home and the telephone was ringing as we walked through the door. So I raced over, picked up the phone, and it was someone unknown to me. And he said, is that Alvia Turney? And I said, yes, how can I help you? And he said, well, I have some information for you and I would like to come to your house and speak to you. So I said, oh, can you tell me what that's about? And he said, well, it's about your husband. And he said, but don't be concerned. I'll stand on the other side of the gate. My heart started racing because I suddenly realised this man actually did know where I lived, because I had a brand new big gate which was attached to a wall, and we just built it. So I said to him, oh my goodness, you know where I live. And he said, actually, I know an awful lot about you. At this stage, I couldn't actually think. I was concerned of who on earth this was, what was going on, what was it about, the embarrassment factor as well, that I had someone in the house and I was so unsure what this man was going to say to me. So I said to him, well, I can't do this now. I have someone in the house. Well, he wasn't taking no for an answer, and he said, don't worry about that. I'll meet you at the end of your road where there is a park. And the funny thing is, he said, don't be scared. I'm in a white van and I'm quite normal. Well, and he hung up. So I didn't have time to actually think. I went to my friend and I said, I have to meet a builder. And she said, oh, that's okay. Off you go. I'll look after the girls. I'll be here when you get back. Take your time. So I jumped in the car, got to the end of the road. And as I'm pulling over, there was a white van. And suddenly, I realised how much at risk I was. I thought I was going to be abducted. And the gentleman walked across the road and he just said, well, let's go and sit in the park. At this stage, it was almost like I'd gone into shock because everything had stopped. I wasn't able to process any information coming at me. I was looking at him. I didn't recognise him. I didn't know who he was. And he said, have you guessed? And I said, no, I haven't guessed. Please just tell me what's going on. And he said, he looked at me and for a moment he was just staring. And I said, what's happened? Like, is everything okay? And he said, it's infidelity. Well, I hadn't been going down that road in my head. I'd been going down embezzlement, had my husband done something at his workplace. Prior to this, when we lived overseas, my husband had been a little bit close to the wind with a few things, and I wondered, what on earth did that word mean, infidelity? I couldn't work it out. So I looked at him, and then suddenly I said, does that mean having an affair? And he said, yes. Well, the relief that flooded over me. I said, oh, you got the wrong family. I said, oh, thank goodness. I said, we have a very unusual surname, and there are 2 other people in the phone book with the same unusual surname. So you need to call them. The look on that man's face, it was actually pity. He looked at me and he said, oh, I'm so sorry. I've made such a big mistake. I wanted to do this for payback. And then I said, oh, are you the husband? But it was really strange, Barbara. The answers that were coming into my head were almost as if they were not mine. I felt like I was stepping into a movie. And he said, yes, I'm the husband. And that's when I noticed he was holding an A4 sized envelope. I grabbed the envelope from him and said, is that for me? To which he said, look, I really don't want you to have this. I'm so sorry. I've made a huge mistake. You are completely innocent. I've just opened up Pandora's box in your life.
Briefly, tell me about your relationship, how you met your husband, how long you were together for before you met this man with the envelope.
Okay. So my husband and I, as I said, we're from overseas, not from Australia. And we met at the young age. I was 21 and I think he's 3 years older than me. So, the typical sweethearts that you are in your 20s. And it was a whirlwind romance. Within 6 months we were engaged, and within a year I was married. And literally a year later we had our first child. We did what couples did back then in the 80s. You found a partner, you bought a house, you settled down into having children quite quickly. It was just the way it was back in the 80s. And we did well financially. I had my own business, he had a good job, and we succeeded. Our children went to private schools, and then we decided to emigrate to Australia. So we packed up everything, around 10 years of being together. My marriage, I realised, wasn't the dream that I thought it was going to be. I met someone who I found to be extrovert, and he had been living a really fun life, jumping out of aeroplanes, and he was a bit of a thrill seeker and had worked overseas. So he was a very interesting character, and I honestly thought that's what my life was going to be like. So when it became very conforming, and I realised he still continued to have fun, but I started to learn early on that I was in a very controlled environment.
So you think that was your challenges in your relationship? He lived almost a separate life. He lived still the life of fun, did what he wanted to do, and you stayed at home and looked after the children.
Yes, I actually had stepped into the Stepford Wives Club. I lived in the lovely home, the private school, taking the children to school role, as well as I had my own businesses, and we earned good money. But I actually didn't know what he did when he left home. I knew where he worked, but we didn't interact with work colleagues. I never saw his life the moment he left the front door. And that seemed normal, that someone just goes to work and comes home. However, in hindsight, I realised how separate his life was. And it wasn't until a couple of things happened. I was brought up as an only child and very well behaved, well mannered, and did as I was told. I was very moralistic as well. Right was right and wrong was wrong. And I remember he brought home some products from work and said that they had been thrown away and that we could sell them and make money. To which I said, that doesn't sound right. And we did actually sell some things and made a little bit of money, but I knew in my gut that something wasn't quite right. And when he suggested this again later on in our marriage, I said no, I didn't want anything to do with it, because I felt that we were doing so well with our working life. Why would we need to do something that could possibly get us into trouble with the police, And my big fear was, oh my God, if one of us has to go to jail over something, what's the point? So that was the end of me ever seeing anything untoward or risque. And so when 23 years later that man phoned me, that's why I had a concern that perhaps he was going to tell me something, why I went down the road of embezzlement or whatever. But of course I was so off track anyway.
So I think we should tell us what was in the envelope, Alvia.
In the envelope was a diary. I thought it would be photos. The gentleman said to me, your husband is a compulsive liar. You won't actually understand until you read the diary and you see what has been going on. Your husband has a completely separate life to what you're used to. I went home, I rang my husband and said, did you know this person? To which he just said, why? There was no fear in his tone or concern for me. And I asked him again. In fact, I asked him 3 times until he admitted that he knew the person's wife. And then I opened the envelope, and way too much information, Barbara. And it's something that I say to my clients now is it's not necessary to have that much information. Once you know that something is wrong or bad or you don't want to be there, really, I had way too much information that you can't empty your head of.
So how did you feel emotionally when you opened that envelope and everything was revealed about your husband's second life, so to speak? Something you had no knowledge of, something that was just such a shock for you to see and to acknowledge.
I went into a shutdown where I couldn't actually cope with my emotions. Emotionally, I became into a state of turmoil. It was difficult to work out what was real because the envelope, the diary, exposed that this had been going on for a long time, and how his comings and goings and where he was and what he said to this person, and how a lot of our intimacy and my private life was all in this diary. So I became very confused of who I was with, and actually a little bit scared as well. It was very confusing. Because I'd led such a black and white life, I couldn't understand how this had happened without any of my knowledge whatsoever.
So this must have been an absolute shock for you, Alvia. How did you process it all in your mind, and how did you move forward and on with your life?
The first difficulty is confronting the situation. Denial is sitting there somewhere. You go to sleep that night. Well, in fact, obviously he came home and we had a conversation. But waking up the next day, I remember that feeling as your eyes open that it hasn't actually happened. And then the realization drops on you like a ton of bricks. And for myself, I've shared this with clients who say the feeling is exactly the same. It feels like a physical pain that someone has punched you in the stomach. The pain is real. It's not just an upset emotional feeling in your head. And so many people who share now with me their separation journeys, when there's infidelity or other things that are a shock, it's a physical pain. So, of course, I've got the children, I've got my family, I've got what do I do about my situation? There's too much. And I realised very quickly that I had to share this with the children. I had to share it with my parents because I used to see my parents regularly. How do you carry on from here? And Barbara, this is where part of Act for Tomorrow is a support for clients, is the fact that when you share things with close people to you, your parents or your friends, everyone has such an extreme care factor for you, but it's sometimes very misplaced. And the information coming at you, which is to leave that person or stay with that person or work on your marriage, don't work on your marriage, find out more facts. You know, you are given too much information. Other people are telling you, go and see a solicitor, don't go and see a solicitor, try and work out a deal. At that stage, I didn't know what I wanted. I had no idea. I didn't understand whether I should be staying with him because the affair was over. So I was being told about the affair when it had actually finished. So for me to make decisions it was way down the track. I was just trying to cope with day to day.
Yes, you're busy. You were too busy dealing with your emotions, what had happened, the shock, and then trying to live your normal life on top of that.
And I was trying to keep things as normal as possible for the children, trying to get them to school. I just remember being in the car one day and tears would just flow, and I'd have my sunglasses on so that I didn't show what I was feeling because it was just total confusion.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to the first part of my interview with Alvia. Part 2 will be available next week and will be episode number 024. In next week's episode, you will listen to how the shock of finding out her husband had an affair sent Alvia into a roller coaster of emotions and suicidal thoughts. Alvia shares how over the next 5 years she went from being a broken woman who found it too confronting to leave her 23-year marriage, to a life where she now uses her experience to help other people through their journey of divorce and separation. I hope you will download this episode and look forward to hearing your reviews. And the last thing I would like to say is, be gentle on yourself. You deserve happiness.
If you would like to hear previous Breakup Recovery podcasts, visit barbarastevens.com.au. Connect with Barbara Stevens on social media with Barbara Stevens Breakup Recovery Mentor on Facebook and at You'll Be Okay on Twitter. Read further blogs, view webinar replays, and download your free ebook, 3 Easy Steps to Surviving Your Breakup, and much more at barbarastevens.com.au.